Coming up on Primetime News, the U.S. Pacific Commander says that America is considering deploying the controversial THAAD missile defense system to Korea. This as Pyongyang vows to keep developing its nuclear program. And vice foreign ministers from Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo sit down for an unprecedented meeting to boost ties. Still, historical tensions between the two Asian countries remain hard to resolve. Korean shares rally on the back of the low-key rate, expectations for improved corporate earnings and ample liquidity. But is it all good news? Stay tuned for these stories and more. Welcome to Primetime News on this Friday, April 17th. I'm Hwang Ji-hye.
And I'm Daniel Choy. Thank you for joining us.
The starting point of our newscast is THAAD. Senior U.S. military officials have testified that they discussed deploying the controversial American missile defense system to the Korean peninsula.
And this comes as North Korea has declared that it will not give up its nuclear program as long as the U.S. continues to pose a threat to them. Our Na Yeon-kyung starts us off.
The U.S. military has been mulling over a potential terminal high-altitude area defense or THAAD battery deployment to South Korea. That's according to U.S. Pacific Commander Admiral Samuel Locklear during a U.S. Senate committee hearing on Thursday, Washington time. He said the U.S. has made progress with Japan and South Korea in terms of bringing ballistic missile defense capabilities to the Asia-Pacific region. Although not elaborating on what the discussions entailed and whom he meant by we, he said, quote, "We have been in discussions about a potential deployment of a THAAD battery on the Korean peninsula." In response, an unnamed South Korean Defense Ministry official said Friday that Locklear probably meant internal discussions because the Korean military has not engaged in any kind of talks about THAAD with the U.S. However, when General Curtis Scaparrotti, the commander of U.S. Forces Korea, who was also present at the hearing, was asked whether South Korea and the U.S. would push ahead with the plan despite China's strong opposition, he replied, "Both countries seem to be taking various other impacts into account," adding that the decision process was underway. The hearing comes as North Korea's Defense Minister Daniel Choy vowed to continue improving the regime's nuclear capabilities. At an international security conference in Moscow on Thursday, Hyun said the, quote, "aggressive nature of the U.S. has not changed," adding that Pyongyang is ready to launch any kind of war if Washington provokes the regime. Na Yeon-kyung, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the U.S. has urged North Korea to show a commitment to ending its nuclear program before coming back to the six-party talks. That is in response to Pyongyang's recent call for the resumption of talks with no conditions attached. U.S. Special Representative for Nuclear Non-Proliferation Adam Scheinman says the ball is in Pyongyang's court. He also stressed the importance of China's role in encouraging North Korea to give up its nuclear ambitions. The six-party talks involving the two Koreas, the U.S., China, Japan, and Russia, were last held in 2008. Now shifting gears, as historical tensions continue to plague the Asia-Pacific region, South Korea, the U.S., and Japan held a trilateral meeting in Washington. For the U.S., the session was a reminder that playing mediator is a difficult role. Hwang Ji-hye reports.
Boosting cooperation on dealing with North Korea's nuclear program was a key issue discussed at the trilateral vice foreign ministers' talks in Washington on Thursday. Although the talks did not lead to a concrete outcome, the U.S. said holding the meeting itself was meaningful. Washington had initiated the talks as a way to ease tensions between Seoul and Tokyo, its two closest allies in Asia.
Today's meeting and the work that we've done together is very powerful evidence of the fact that we have an extraordinary array of shared interests, and that's built on the foundation of shared values.
Korea acknowledged the importance of cooperation, but with limitations.
We are maintaining a consistent, principled position and stand on the issues of history, and that will continue to be the case.
Seoul said Tokyo must correct its distorted sense of history in order to improve their bilateral relations. Japan countered with an ambiguous response.
The speech you mentioned that the Prime Minister will be addressing the joint session of the U.S. Congress, Prime Minister is still working on that. I haven't seen the draft yet, so I cannot answer your question.
Korea wants Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to acknowledge Japan's wartime atrocities when he travels to the U.S. later this month. With Seoul and Tokyo still far from friendly, the trilateral meeting seems to be another reminder that bringing the two neighbors closer together will be a difficult challenge for Washington. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is coming under fire for his alleged heavy-handed treatment of one of his most outspoken critics. A political pundit on a well-known Japanese TV program claims Abe's inner circle had him booted off the show. Watchers say this is merely the latest in a string of efforts to restrict the freedom of press in Japan. With more, here's our Son Jung-in.
A leading Japanese political commentator who had been a regular panelist on a popular TV news program has revealed that he was yanked off the air due to pressure from the Shinzo Abe administration. Shigeaki Koga, a vocal critic of the Japanese Prime Minister, held up a piece of paper saying, "I am not Abe," during his last live appearance. Koga, who used to work for Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, said he was given a severe ticking off by Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga and other members of the Prime Minister's office for his critical views on Japan's bureaucratic society. Controversy grew after the ruling Liberal Democratic Party's Policy Committee decided to summon and question the show's broadcaster TV Asahi over Koga's claims, as well as Japan's public broadcaster NHK over alleged factual errors in a news report. Although the ruling party claims the meeting was not to intervene in the media coverage but to discuss recent events, some watchers view it as a worrying trend.
The ruling party's involvement in the situation is contradictory to democracy and freedom of the press.
This is not the first time the Abe administration has been embroiled in controversy over editorial independence. Earlier this week, a German newspaper correspondent based in Tokyo slammed the Japanese government, saying Tokyo had suppressed an article he had written on Abe's historical revisionism. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
And that TV personality is not alone. Another critic of Abe is internationally celebrated writer Haruki Murakami. He joined the chorus of people urging the Japanese government to apologize for its wartime atrocities. In an interview with Japan's Kyodo News Agency, the Japanese novelist said that the act of apologizing should not be regarded as shameful. He added that his government should acknowledge its past wrongdoings and apologize until the affected nations accept that apology. He went on to criticize the lukewarm gestures Japan has made so far. Korea is especially frustrated with his country's lack of atonement for its sexual enslavement of tens of thousands of Korean women during and before World War II.
Now, President Park Geun-hye is in the Colombian capital of Bogota as part of her four-nation South America tour. Before her summit talks with Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos today, she shared her expectations for the visit with a local daily. Choi Yu-sun files this report from Colombia.
Accompanied by the usual pomp and circumstance, President Park Geun-hye arrived in Colombia, the first stop on her South America tour. Prior to her visit, she told local daily El Colombiano that combining South America's vast natural and human resources with Korea's strengths in IT and other science and technology fields will generate a lot of synergy. With a combined GDP of nearly $6 trillion, the 33 countries of Central and South America are rich in copper, lithium, and zinc, and home to more than 600 million people. Referring to Colombia's development initiatives, President Park said there are many ways Korea can share its infrastructure and energy development expertise to everyone's benefit. The Korean leader also talked about improving South American healthcare, education, and environmental systems.
As for Korea and Colombia's free trade deal, now awaiting final approval from Colombia to be implemented, President Park said it will increase and diversify goods traded, helping the bilateral trade exceed last year's $2 billion value. In regards to our efforts to prepare for inter-Korean unification, President Park said there is a lot South Korea can learn from Colombia, as the country is laying a foundation for peace and national unity while healing the wounds from a half-century of civil war. Meeting with our Colombian counterpart on Friday, President Park plans to ask the country's constitutional court for swift approval so that the bilateral free trade agreement can go into effect. She'll also discuss opportunities for Korean firms to participate in Colombia's infrastructure projects. Choi Yusun, Arirang News, Bogota.
Back here in the nation, with by-elections less than 2 weeks away, Korea's rival parties are on the campaign trail this Friday. The campaign period officially started on Thursday, but stumping was subdued out of respect for the one-year anniversary of the Seoul ferry disaster. On this Friday, ruling Saenuri Party leader Kim Moo-sung visited 3 out of 4 constituencies where by-elections will be held on April 29th. He's crisscrossed the country, starting in Gwangju in the southwest, then on to Ganghwa-do Island, and finishing up in Seoul's Gwanak-B district. In contrast, main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy leader Moon Jae-in spent the whole day in the hotly contested Gwanak-B area, aiming to ensure the Liberal Party nabbs the seat.
With the Korean stock market hitting record highs and moving up a ranking to 11th in the world in terms of total market capitalization, industry watchers are feeling optimistic. But will this upward trend continue in the long run? Our Shin Se-min tells us more.
Korea's tech-savvy Kosdaq exceeded the 700-point mark on Friday for the first time in more than 7 years. The high was driven by a 29% index increase over the first 3 months of 2015. Korea's benchmark stock index, KOSPI, also peaked at its highest level in 3.5 years, closing at 2,139 points this Thursday, breaking out of the 1,700 to 2,100 point range that stood for years. Korea's total market capitalization, combining the values of all listed companies, is now the 11th highest in the world, up more than 13% from the end of last year. The data released by Korea Exchange and Bloomberg on Friday shows that the country's combined market cap hit over $1.34 trillion as of Wednesday, making it the 4th best performing stock market among the world's leading 15. Foreign investment banks were quick to deliver optimistic outlooks. Morgan Stanley projected that KOSPI will rise to 2,200 points based on an expectation that Korea Central Bank would cut the key interest rate again in the second quarter of the year. UK-based Barclays went a step further, forecasting that the key index will reach 2,300 points this year, backed by improving corporate earnings. But a local market watcher points out that the bullish market was mainly led by large companies like Samsung Electronics.
The Korean stock market has been growing at a much faster pace than the performances shown by the listed companies. So unless they turn in better performances, overall the market is unlikely to hit the targets of foreign banks.
He added that long-term market growth depends on companies sensitive to the global economy, such as petrochemical, steel, and shipbuilding businesses. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Despite signs of a rebound in the local bourse, Korea's Finance Minister Choi Geunhye does not seem at all certain about the overall pace of recovery. He told CNBC Thursday that if necessary, the government will take additional stimulus measures in the second half of this year. He added, however, that additional cuts in the key rate is something for the Bank of Korea to decide, as it could be at odds with how well the economy is doing. The key rate currently stands at a record low of 1.75%, following a 1/4 percentage point trim last month.
Let's move on to the tech realm. Samsung Electronics widened its share of the global smartphone market in the first 3 months of the year, extending its lead on Apple. Experts say Samsung's newest Galaxy phones should spearhead the charge to another surge in the next quarter. Our Kwon So-hwa reports.
The first quarter figures for the world smartphone market are out. And they're looking good for Korea's tech giant Samsung Electronics, as its sales volume in the January to March period accounted for 27.8% of the global market. That's up more than 3 percentage points from the previous quarter. It also means Samsung is outpacing its top rival Apple, which had less than 20% of the global market share, down more than 3 percentage points from the October to December period last year. Back then, Samsung and Apple were just 1.5 percentage points apart, and now Samsung is almost 8 percentage points ahead. Analysts say this pattern is not surprising.
Apple usually performs well in the fourth quarter, as that's when it releases its new models. And thereafter, the figures steadily go downhill as the effects of the new phone's sales let up.
Global market tracker TrendForce, who released the data Friday, predicts that Samsung Electronics will increase its share even further in the second quarter due to the recent release of its latest Galaxy S6 and S6 Edge smartphones. According to the report, Apple is expected to release around 45 million units in the second quarter, while Samsung is expected to ship more than 80 million units. Many of those will be going to China, where Samsung announced the official release of the new flagship series on Friday. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Shifting gears now, ramen may be a favorite snack among Koreans, but government data shows that it may be losing its charm outside the country. The Korea Customs Service reports that the country's ramen exports dropped to $208 million last year, down around 2% from a year ago. The agency attributes the drop to falling Japanese demand, with ramen exports to the country having dropped by more than half since the year 2011. Given that, the biggest instant noodle market abroad now is China. Well, there was a time when ramen was the poor man's substitute for rice here in Korea.
And then when rice became affordable, rice consumption actually dropped.
Right, and this next story may give you a better appreciation for rice, especially locally grown ones.
A new study predicts that with climate change picking up speed, Korea could soon be facing a decline in rice production. Connie Kim tells us about the scale of the problem.
The Korea Rural Economic Institute is predicting that global warming will reduce the country's rice production by about 1 million tons by 2050. That drop means Korea's rice self-sufficiency ratio would take a hit. 5 years ago, 83% of the rice in Korea was grown in the country. In a few decades, it could be less than 50%. The institute says the reduction is alarming as it raises food security risks and increases Korea's dependency on foreign rice.
The amount of land available to rice farmers has been decreasing, but it will shrink even faster with climate change. Korea will be importing more rice, but we have a problem. If the supplying country suspends its shipments, then securing rice for consumers in Korea will become a serious issue.
The Korea Meteorological Administration forecasts that between 2071 to 2100, the climate on the peninsula will have risen by 5.7 degrees Celsius. That temperature hike will dry up the wet, fertile land required for rice farming. To combat the shift, the institute recommends a long-term management strategy that would include investing in agricultural infrastructure and developing rice varieties resistant to climate change. But experts also point out that educating farmers to adopt and utilize new technologies is as important as making them available. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
And it's now time to take a look at the top headlines from around the world with our Paul Yi.
Our focus today, the UN reviews alleged chemical warfare in Syria. China sentences a journalist for leaking state secrets, and sci-fi fans get a sneak peek at the next Star Wars movie.
Right, Paul, before we get to your most anticipated story, let's start off with the United Nations Security Council. A meeting was held on Thursday to discuss the crisis in Syria amid mounting allegations of deadly gas attacks. Can you give us the details on that?
Well, the 15 council members convened to hear first-hand accounts from Syrian civilians who they say have been coming under fire from chemical weapons, which could constitute as a war crime under international treaties. The Security Council reviewed video footage taken last month of an apparent chlorine gas attack in the northeast of the country. Testimonies from survivors and Syrian doctors corroborated reports that at least 6 people were killed, including children younger than 4. The American ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, condemned the attack and said those responsible would be brought to justice. The chair of the council, Dina Kawar, said it was time to take action to not only stop the violence, but help resolve the political problems at the root of the conflict. And turning to China, a court in Beijing has sentenced a Chinese journalist convicted of leaking state secrets to 7 years in jail. Gao Yu was arrested last year for allegedly providing an internal Communist Party document to a foreign website. The 71-year-old, who is a well-known anti-government activist, denies the charges. Following the ruling, the European Union said the verdict raises concerns about the country's human rights situation.
The delegation of the European Union to China is deeply concerned over the verdict of 7 years imprisonment handed down to Gao Yu, veteran journalist Gao Yu. And this sentence has heightened our concern over the situation of human rights defenders in China, including bloggers and journalists who have been prosecuted for expressing freely their views.
Meanwhile, demonstrators in Hong Kong protested in the streets on Friday, shouting a release of Gao Yu. Human rights groups, including Amnesty International, have condemned the verdict as political persecution. And finally, ending on a lighter note, sci-fi fans received a treat today with the release of the international trailer for the next chapter in the Star Wars saga. Let's take a look.
I have it.
Directed by J.J. Abrams, The Force Awakens picks up 30 years after the original trilogy. The CEO of the Walt Disney Company, Robert Iger, said the film will stay true to the spirit of the franchise.
J.J. is the perfect director for this property. He is a passionate Star Wars fan. He's someone who respects George Lucas and Lucasfilm and Star Wars in the extreme. He also is extremely mindful of the need to both be respectful of the great heritage and the great legacy.
The teaser was the highlight at the annual Star Wars Celebration Convention in California this week. Star Wars Episode 7 is set to hit theaters worldwide in December. And that wraps up our look at international stories for now. I'll see you back here on Monday.
Well, we had a beautiful spring day today. The highs were slightly below the averages, but strong sunshine led a balmy afternoon. And tomorrow will be warmer with highs jumping to 22 here in the capital. But beware about big temperature gaps between lows and highs. It could be as wide as 15 degrees. And if you're planning to be outdoors this weekend, Saturday looks to be a better day for it, as it will rain all day long on Sunday, nationwide, including here in Seoul. But the southern provinces could start seeing rain late tomorrow night. Up to 80 millimeters is expected, and the rain could linger till Monday morning. But again, tomorrow is expected to be a pleasant spring day around the nation, and the daytime high here in Seoul and Gwangju will rise to 22, while Daegu and Busan will peak at 23 and 19 respectively. And as for the other regions, it seems like Daejeon and Jeju will see a high of 22, while Dokdo rises to 17. Now, after the rain lets up on Monday morning, the whole nation will enjoy some nice spring weather next week. Well, that's all for Korea, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
And that brings us to the end of our newscast. Thank you so much for staying with us. This has been Daniel Choy.
And I'm Hwang Ji-hye. Have a great weekend, and we will see you same time next week. Goodbye for now.